Heather, and I'm here with Michael and Kylie, and this is River Talk. Today our topic is Cuba and the United States and their relationship and everything in regards to their history and their current events today. So Cuban leader Fidel Castro established the first communist state in the Western Hemisphere. In your own definitions, what is a communist?
That's an interesting question. I think communism, the roots of communism come from socialism, and so the idea is that all the assets are maintained by the government rather than independently owned.
Yeah, I feel a lot of it is government mandated, not a lot of say by the people, a lot of equality as far as financially and in the workplace. Most things are equal and things are owned by the government and not privately, as opposed to capitalism.
Good definitions. Okay, so in regards to that, Americans didn't really care for how Castro just kind of took in and made it a communist state. So why do you think Fidel Castro hated Americans back?
Well, I think that what you're talking about is comes along with the foundations of the Cold War. I don't necessarily think that he necessarily hated Americans. I think that we had already begun what would be the Cold War with the Soviet Union, and I think that he just chose the other side of the line. I think people really need to look at some of the history of Florida, and about the same time Fidel came into power, a number of individuals from the East Coast, along with some of the organized crime families, were attempting to move casino style or an Atlantic City style environment into South Florida. Well, a large portion of Florida is owned by ranchers and oil and gas men, and they bonded together to kind of push gambling out of Florida. And so one of the first big presences Americans had in Cuba were what would be considered more of the shadier aspects of our culture. You had a lot of the casino element and a lot of the organized crime element that were trying to turn Cuba into what would be an Atlantic City, a Las Vegas, or like a Monte Carlo style setting. And so you saw all this American money could be interpreted as American dirty money influencing Cuba immediately right as he comes into power. And as Americans, I don't think that our political and our government aspect really cared too much how he treated those first few Americans that were sent, the first aspects of American business that were transferred there. And I think that when he kind of established communism, kicked them all out and kept their money, I don't think it really upset the American government too much, because most of these individuals were crime related or crooked business kind of sort of. And so I think that he was responding to an element of corruption created by capitalism, and I think that those were the first introductions of capitalism to the Cuban people right as he was developing communism or socialism there, and I think that that's why he took off such a harsh stance. And at first, as Americans, we didn't really object too much of it. It wasn't until much later when we had missile crises and things like that where Cuba really became a huge issue. At first, their response was something that most of the American people had already done on their own. They'd already pushed this type of business and these type of businessmen out of a number of communities in America.
I feel like right in 1959, during the Cuban Revolution, when Fidel and a bunch of other radicals came in, overthrew the dictator, and they kind of took control, that really shows their radical character in the first place. So for the U.S. to intervene and try and bring in their capitalism, I don't think that's something that Fidel would have appreciated, especially because by 1961, he had openly admitted that he was a Marxist. And when you have two different types of economies clashing with each other, especially a big power like the United States, I feel it's more of a threat, and I don't think that Castro liked that. And when you have them, in this article, Fidel Castro is considered a rebel in 1959 that takes over the capital. I don't think that he's gonna like a structured element like the United States trying to intervene with his plans.
Well, and I totally agree with what she's saying there, and I literally think that the little bit of influence the United States had there, he actually gained off of. Like, I think that he monopolized a bunch of their resources and then basically kicked them out of the country. And so I think that he used it as a way to kind of personify his new way, and additionally, he took the capitalistic money to kind of propel his government into power.
Well, and I think in a short-term reaction to the big revolution that was happening in Cuba, the Eisenhower administration was kind of shocked. They wanted to make sure that we weren't having a lot of issues that were like flowing into the United States, so that's what initially inspired the Cuban embargo. because we didn't want to be involved in all the radical activity that was going on over there.
Well, and to some degree, we were on like a behind the scenes. We were trying to manipulate things in the direction that we wanted, and we weren't doing it successfully. And so I think that the embargo kind of came about because of our, that was one of our first attempts to influence what was going on in Cuba, and it was one of many that ended up being fairly unsuccessful. And so I think that's what solidified the whole embargo.
Well, and that would be why now Obama says that he promises them that Cuba's destiny is not going to be decided by the United States, and that they're a sovereign state and they have a right to decide how they want to run things. I think they're a little worried that we're going to try to control the situation a little bit too much.
And I see what you're saying there, and I think that we as a country and all through the Cuban Missile Crisis 60s and 70s, we actually gained control over how our people feel about Cuba by maintaining the embargo, by maintaining the fear of communism and things like that. And I think that now that we're doing business with Russia and China and different dictators throughout the Middle East, I think the actual threat of them influencing our government, or really our government influencing them, has kind of died down. And that's why I don't really see it to be such a big deal. I think that it was more of a carrot or the stick situation, and I think that we had kind of embraced the stick option, and now that it's not really necessary, I think that we've kind of switched over to more of the carrot approach.
Gotcha. Okay, so like you brought up Obama, he recently just visited Cuba and he met with the Cuban president, Raul Castro, who was Fidel's younger brother. Do you guys think this was a good idea or bad?
Actually, Obama has been having secret meetings with Raul for the last couple of years, probably since about 2013. He's been making negotiations with them and just privately talking about discussing having a normal relationship with Cuba again. And I feel like it was probably a little more quiet of a situation because like it is big news now, it probably would have shocked the United States a little bit, and he probably didn't know how it would affect people. People get kind of fired up about that, but fortunately for President Obama, most Americans are responding positively to this situation as of now.
I feel that it was long overdue. I feel that if anything, the United States was using it at their advantage, so we could at least keep one villain on the table, because I think that a lot of politics has to do with people misinterpreting situations, or people being afraid of situations, which allows governments to do things like pass the Patriot Act and behave in manners outside of what one would consider the best interest of their people.
That makes sense. Okay, so I know you guys are familiar with social media, and have you seen the video of Obama and his handshake? Have you guys seen that?
I haven't seen that yet.
I have. Where you grab the arm instead of the hand, it was kind of a misinterpretation of cultures.
Obama was trying to be buddy-buddy, since you didn't see the video, and put his arms around, and Castro did this, and just kind of put it back down. And how do you think that appears to us?
Okay, so I think that for Castro to be able to embrace the Americans as trading partners and for things to change, he has to do so without losing his essence of power. You know what I mean? Even if it's not an equal trade, at least it needs to appear to be an equal trade. And what leads me to, and so I think that it's a series of just body languages. I think Obama was trying to show friendship and dominance at the same time, being a larger man and kind of engrossing the smaller man, which is kind of like the larger country kind of wrapping itself around the smaller country. And I think that he was trying to bring it back more to an even playing field, or even exert some of his own dominance.
I think that's probably offensive to Mr. Castro, especially being, when you're the president of the United States, you have to be aware of the cultural norms in other places, and if you're not, that's really not good for your public relations, because I feel that prior to being in this position, you're going to be interacting internationally with a lot of different characters, and if you don't know what's going to make them uncomfortable, you should probably do research about what your customs
Now,
are
see,
there.
I feel that it was done intentionally. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen any film footage of Bill Clinton when he was president, but he almost always did the double handshake. He would reach out, take your hand, and then he would put his other hand on top of yours, which is a sign of dominance and control. And so I think that where it was a different style, I feel that both men were attempting to do this. I don't think that it was a mistake. I think it was intentional on both sides.
I don't think that's appropriate.
I mean, I think that's politics.
I mean, I just think it just shows weakness in Obama, but that is just my opinion. Anyway, so why do you think people still oppose normalizing relations with Cuba still to this day?
I can't think of any logical reason. I can think of a number of fear-based and political reasons. I think that one example I would, and we were having a discussion earlier about this, but I feel that the representation of the Cuban people here in America, the only ones that we've really gotten to know are their radicals and their criminals. And so I think that we are judging an entire culture by the actions of its leader and by basically the individuals that have been expelled or have fled the country. And so I don't think that as the American people have a real good understanding of actually the Cuban people. I think that we have extreme cases of, their leader and their criminals, and I think that we're kind of making judgment calls based on those two.
I think the problem is that in 1996 we're still having instances of terrorist attacks, like Cuba shot down 2 U.S. planes, civilian planes nonetheless, not even military personnel, and I just feel like that does rightfully so instill fear in the American people, although they were removed from the list of sponsored terrorism in 2015, which, 20 years later, I think that maybe that would be an appropriate amount of time if you have been negotiating with the state for 2 years now, privately, but I just think that we, rightfully so, are a little scared when we have groups like ISIS and other forms of terrorism constantly surrounding us, and we never know what direction the terrorism is coming from. So
that's great points that you make. One thing though, if you were to study the history of it all, the communism and the socialists almost have more to fear from ISIS than we do. Like they've committed more atrocities against that style of terrorist group, and they've actually suffered more casualties at their hands than we have here in the United States.
That's right.
So if anything, this terrorist action, I think that the threat of ISIS and that style of terrorism might actually be even what's inspiring some of the new relationships with Cuba. They're very close to us. If we had better relations with them, they wouldn't be able to be used as a launching point to get into our country. And I think when it comes to it, socialism has as much to fear from ISIS as capitalism does.
So do you think that it's a matter of not really good-hearted intentions where we truly want to make kinship with Cuba again, rather than being allies with them against ISIS?
Well, when it comes down to it, we're capitalists by nature, so I think that we will disguise a bad idea with good intentions if the economy supports it, or vice versa.
I feel like that's natural with any economy in politics, like you had just stated a couple minutes ago. What about nuclear weapons and the issues that we have with rumors that ISIS has nuclear weapons? And it's always been a really uneasy feeling when you hear rumors about different countries having them, not knowing where they're pointing or if they are actually available and when they could go off.
I don't necessarily think that we have anything to fear from a government releasing a nuclear weapon on us, but I think that a dirty bomb created by terrorists is a reality. And so I don't necessarily think it would even be so bad, especially nowadays with the technology exists that you can pretty much launch a missile and hit anywhere that you want, or launch a drone and hit anywhere that you want. I don't think that the proximity concern is as big as it used to be, because it used to be that they couldn't get to us, and then them being close, they could get to us, but that's not really a situation anymore. And so I think that it would be in our best interest to continue to increase our trade with Cuba, just so should a terrorist manage to sneak into Cuba, then they couldn't sneak something into the United States. If they were looking out for the same individuals that we were looking out for, I don't think that we would be as big a threat.
Do you think it would help America's economy better if we just focused on our own domestic products instead of trying to make more deals with trading?
We are a service-based industry now more than a manufacturing-based industry, and we are always on the lookout for more individuals that would like to purchase our services. And Cuba was ripe for that. We could help modernize all their information technology. We could improve the way that they do business and profit off of it in many different ways.
The problem is that Castro was concerned with us mandating things like that, and I think that he likes things a certain way, that he wants to be able to have those relations again in order to kind of gain a sense of power. Like, I have you on my side, but we're more like frenemies, because I'm still going to do things the way I want to do, and you're not going to dictate the way that our destiny is going to be. And then, you have small business owners in Cuba saying, we want change, we're tired of waiting, and then you have a big power like the United States coming in saying, hey, we want to normalize our relationship with you, we're going to give you change, but you have Castro in the middle saying, no.
That
Okay.
leads me to my next question. Why do you think the Cuban people, just in general, are happy with their way that they're?
Absolutely not.
Mhm. I'd have to agree with there.
I would have to say that some aspects of their version of socialism or communism are premier examples due to the fact that it's a microclimate. I think that they have a good education system. I think they have a good healthcare system. I think what they're lacking there is opportunity. And so it's like one thing the United States has is hope and opportunity.
Because we're capitalists.
Because we're capitalists, well, and it's like, even though a Cuban is probably just as likely to end up doing the same thing that their parents did as an American is, the Americans grow up with the knowledge that there is a chance or a hope for them to be something greater. Where in Cuba,
Do you think Castro diminishes that hope though?
well, I think that our embargo diminishes that hope. And he's a big part of that embargo, and so it takes two people to have an argument. But I think that the biggest resource that Cuba is lacking is opportunity and hope. And those are two of our strongest commodities when it comes to our social structure.
If they're lacking, how could they lack so much opportunity and hope when they have such a great system of communism with free healthcare?
Well, it's the
and
same
equal
reason,
public schooling?
the same reason that capitalism and communism have troubles. If there isn't a constant outflux or influx, then eventually there is no opportunity. Like if the United States shut its borders down and stopped trading with everyone and only focused on itself, at some point we would all just be trading the same chair and the same $100 bill back and forth with one another.
Correct.
If we never imported or exported. And so the reason why they're having trouble in Cuba and where a lot of the people aren't happy is because their best and their brightest aren't allowed to go out into the world. They're not allowed to bring new resources in. They're not allowed to take the resources, which are healthy, intelligent, educated individuals that part of communism creates, and go to other places.
But under a communist government, they won't be able to do that regardless of if we have a relationship with them or not, correct?
Well, I don't think so. I think that you're making some assumptions on that, and we should look into that further. But I really feel that because I mean, it's like Russia was communist forever, and their people still made it out into the world, and so did resources make it back in because they were allowed to expand, and with that expansion came that opportunity that I was speaking of. And Cuba is basically just a little microclimate. Like they're doing as good as they can without introducing elements from the outside or without exporting anything. And you also, where I don't agree with any of the ways that the Fidel dictatorship, or however you want to look at it, has went about things, you've got to look at their neighbors too. Like look at the mess that Haiti, like 1 in 3 don't have running water or power. You know, the other islands in that part of the world are like havens for illegal banking activity and crime and drug smuggling. And so it's like the Cubans have really made quite a solid and beneficial society, even with some of the negative decisions their leaders have made, versus a lot of the other countries that are living in the same economic and regional area.
So don't you think we should be starting small in regions like Haiti and those really troubled areas where they can, once they have a good influence from us, they can pass it on?
There's no money there. There's nothing to be gained from there because they're unstable and they're undeveloped countries. Where Cuba is stable and developed, and so as goods and services, specifically military goods and services, but definitely goods and services being our biggest export, it's a much more prime example or prime marketplace versus individuals that are living without shoes and huts without power or food. They don't really want to buy internet service, telecommunication services, anything from Amazon.
No, there's.
Where the Cubans would be wrecked for it. Plus, Fidel will die soon, and things will change.
You think? Okay. So, thank you guys for joining me today. We had a good talk, and see you next week.